Please help me welcome Kight.
Thank you. Thank you. So, growing up, I was probably the most traditional classical violinist that any of you could imagine. So I grew up playing nothing but Mozart and Beethoven, all of the music that you would hear in the background of a jewelry commercial. That was me. And while others my age were doing these silly things like going outside and making friends, I was always getting ready for that next orchestra concert. And that was my life for many years. But then after one of these concerts, something happened that changed my life. I got home, and I was sitting in my bedroom, and I heard a knock on the door. And I look up, and it was my mother. But she wasn't saying a word. She was completely silent with this frozen look on her face. And that was the night that she told me that she had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And before I could say a word, she just starts to tell me all of these different stories from her childhood, how she was always making things with her hands and how she was making clothes and jewelry, and how now she had all these regrets that perhaps she would never have a chance to bring any of these ideas to the world. And after that night, days passed, weeks passed, and I'm so fortunate to say that her cancer went into remission and that she was a survivor. But you see, our conversation that night, it still haunted me because it forced me to look at my own life and ask, was I just on a path to have that same moment of regret later in life? And so I began to look at my life, I began to look at music through a whole new perspective. and I began to return to that same orchestra with this renewed sense of energy. Now, by a show of hands, who here has been to a live orchestra concert before? Okay, great. So for the 2 people that haven't, there's this very particular span of time in the beginning of the show. Now, what happens is, before the real music begins, the performers will come on stage and they'll tune their instruments and warm up so that it's not silent as the audience waits for the real show. And back when I was in this orchestra, this was my favorite part of the show. And let me tell you why. So while the performers sitting next to me, to my left and right, would always warm up to the Mozart on the music stand right in front of us, I would always use this time for a slightly different reason. So I would sit back in my chair, and off the top of my head, I would improvise, I would jam, I would come up with these different melodies and rhythms. And then I would look out into the audience and pretend like everyone was there to see me. This was my showtime, right? And some of the ideas I really liked. And so on the back of the sheet music in front of me, I would jot down some of the notes so that I could come back to them later. Now, my stand partner, who was the performer sitting next to me on stage, she hated every time I would do this with the music. But I never let her get to me because in my mind, the audience was loving it. And so we would be making these sounds for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden, the lights would dim, and the audience would shh and get completely silent. This meant it was time for the conductor to take the stage. Now, at this point in my life, the conductor was the scariest, most intimidating person that I knew. And so as he walked from behind the curtains to come to the front of the stage and step up on the podium, I had to make sure to sit up straight and turn that sheet music back over so that he couldn't see what I was writing on the back. And when he would get to the front of the stage, he would turn around and he would look at us with these piercing eyes as if to let us know that if we embarrassed him at all, he knew exactly who we were. And as he lifted his hands for us to start playing the real music, I was in this predicament. You see, because my mind was so fixated on these notes that I was writing on the back of the page, I wasn't as prepared for the real music that sat in front of me. But it was okay because I actually had a plan for this. So whenever I got to a difficult section of the music, I would do something similar to the air guitar. So I'd play the air violin, looking like the greatest professional, but without making a sound at all. And the air violin is almost like an art form in itself. It's almost like synchronized diving in the Olympics, because the worst possible scenario is for the music to end and for you to be the last person moving on stage. Now, in hindsight, I think I was a little too good at the air violin, because after one of these concerts, the conductor came to the next rehearsal and said that we needed to do something called a down the line. And a down the line is like the most intense employee review process you can imagine. So the conductor could pick any part of the music and make any performer stand up to play it one by one in front of the whole orchestra. And of course, the conductor picked a part of the music for which I was a master air violinist. And so he starts calling on people one by one to play. And it's an odd feeling to know that you're the one that he's looking for the whole time. And so now it's my stand partner's turn, which means I'm next. And she stands up to play. And she sounds like Mozart himself. She doesn't miss a note. It was perfect. And when she finishes and lowers to sit back down, she was just smiling at me because she knew what was going to happen to me next. And so I stand up to play, and after about 5 seconds, it becomes increasingly obvious that the conductor is just not a fan of the air violin at all. He cuts me off. And at first, I'm happy that he put me out of this embarrassment. But before I could sit back down, he tells me in front of everyone that I won't be able to play in the next concert. I stood there embarrassed. But that night, I practiced that part over and over again. And over time, that same right hand technique that I was avoiding so much, that same technique is what allows me to play different rhythms on the violin today. In fact, that first piece of music I just performed for you, I composed it, and I was only able to do so because of that same technique. Now, I often ask, when it comes to our lives and our work, are we writing new music or just playing the notes that have been handed to us in life? But perhaps the greater question is, perhaps the greatest question we can ask today is this: what do we do with the difficult music that's already sitting in front of us? When it comes to the circumstances that make us feel weak, do we avoid them? Do we play the air violin in life? Do we just play the music that makes us sound good? Or do we dare to play the music that will make us stronger?